Cen-X, real talk
at the heart of your community.
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cen-X podcast. Today we're joined by Farid from Impact on Urban Health. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Very excited.
So, just before we start, can you just give us just what's your role at Impact on Urban Health and what you do there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a portfolio manager at Impact on Urban Health. So that basically means, so what I do, we work in health equity basically. So we look to fund projects and partnerships that tackle health inequities and issues in South London, so Lambeth and Southwark. So my role is basically to look for partnerships, look for projects to be able to tackle those issues. And we're a funder, so we kind of fund those projects and try and reach some outcomes from that.
And before we get into the work, I'd like to know what was sort of your foundations as a person, personally, what was your upbringing like? What was you always wanting to do this sort of work or?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So my foundations, so I've always been in London, Essex, kind of been between those two places. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in East Ham, East London, lived there till I was 15, went to school in further out in Romford area. So my foundation's been interesting because I've had the perspective of growing up in an inner city area in London, but also kind of seeing the other side, the more suburban side, the less diverse side. And then from a personal perspective as well, my dad is Nigerian, my mum is German, so I have multiple cultures coming into that as well. And that's been really interesting. For me, it aids me in a way that I navigate the world as well.
Okay, and do you know, just growing up in different areas, seeing both sides of the spectrum, let's say, do you think that's been a positive influence on sort of the work you do now as well?
I think so. It's interesting. I think it opened my eyes at quite a young age. So I think when I was 11, I remember going to my secondary school, and I remember on my first day, basically seeing the amount of white kids in one place at one time. I was like, oh my God, I've never seen that many in one place at one time. And I think that just opened my eyes really early to different people's perspectives and how you can have your own world and your own bubble, and that can be very different to how other people are living. So I think that's really helped me in my role, especially because as you know, Lambeth and Southwark is very diverse. It's got lots of different cultures, lots of different perspectives, and then where I work as well has its own culture and its own perspective. So how to work between those two cultures and work between those two kind of ways of thinking and ways of talking and languages that we speak and translating from one to the other, I think has been, my upbringing has definitely aided to that because that comes to me quite naturally.
How do you find having to navigate between the two?
It's interesting. I think there's positives and negatives because I feel especially working with people like Centric, I can make connections a lot easier. I can build trust with people in communities, and that makes work quite joyful actually. It's a lot more fun. I can connect with people that I resonate with, that I look like, and all that kind of stuff. So that's good, and it also that makes the work better as well. I feel relationships, good strong relationships, definitely makes the work better. But then also at the same time, navigating that, talking in one way, then talking in another way. That's often quite difficult, and I struggled with it at the start. But as I kind of got more comfortable in the role, I brought my authentic self to the office in the way that I dress and the way that I talk and stuff like that. So it's a journey.
Thank you. And so with Impact on Urban Health, why did you decide to do this role, and why is it important to you?
Do you want the long answer or the short answer?
The long answer. We've got time.
Okay. Yeah. I think it links. It's so I didn't work in impact kind of work for most of my career. So I actually studied finance and economics at uni.
Okay.
And my first job, coming out of uni, my first 9-to-5 job was in a finance organization, a fintech organization, where we kind of did lending for small businesses. It was very commercial, and that was quite interesting because I think in my personal life and in my family life, my family's quite socially oriented, by mum is a counsellor, my dad works in a school, my sister works in mental health,
Okay.
and that's always been like part of like my home life, and that kind of fabric. But for some reason, kind of got pushed into that finance side. I guess like you make money, that kind of stuff, and chased that, and that felt like a bit of a juxtaposition for me. So yeah, working in finance, worked there for like 6-7 years, until I think at some point I was just in front of the computer at like 9-10 p.m. Doing some PowerPoint slide for something, somewhere going somewhere else, and I was like, why am I actually doing this? Like, what is my why?
Yeah.
Like, what am I actually doing? Like, what's this actually achieving? And I guess in all frankness, it was achieving wealth for someone who's already wealthy. So how do I make my CEO richer? How do I make the shareholders more wealthy? And that just didn't feel like something I wanted to do. And I think that's where that kind of value, the family value, kind of came into that. So I looked for different roles, looked for how to get out. That's quite difficult when you're, I guess, quite deep into that career. How do you transition and like maintain a level of kind of seniority or responsibility? And that was, so I went onto a program called On Purpose. So it's basically for people who worked in the finance sector or worked in the private sector and wanted to move into impact.
Okay.
So that was like, I did that for a year.
Is that like the way in then?
That was the way in, yeah. And then this job came up, and it was like a really interesting role because it works on like racial equity for one, and that was really important to me and kind of reinvigorated because that was the time of like George Floyd's murder.
Okay.
So that's when I was kind of doing that transition into this space. And it was also doing things that are like local, and it was also doing things that were to do with things that I thought were important, like air pollution, environment, those kind of things. It kind of had all those kind of aspects in it, and that really attracted me to the role. Yeah.
And so, do you feel like the role you're in now, like you've got more purpose in what you're doing, like for yourself as well?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what do you think your life would have been like? Say, for example, you stayed in the job you was in.
I think about that sometimes. Like, I still keep in touch with a few old colleagues.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the longer I'm in this, like my new kind of role and sector, the further away my thinking is from that space.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have changed a lot. And I don't know, life would have been, I think I would have probably ended up being quite frustrated for doing something that I knew that wasn't really, like, didn't feel important to me. Mm-hmm. Life could have been a lot more comfortable, but I feel like it was definitely the right choice to come into this. Yeah.
I like that. And so just on the work, like with the partnership with Centric, so what does that sort of consist of, and what was the topic or theme that the partnership was built on?
Yeah. So I first got introduced to Dr. Sean Dankwa from Centric. How long ago now? Probably a year and a half ago. And the thing that we were working on, or the thing that I was asked to work on, was a topic around air pollution. Okay. In the air pollution space, people are trying to do lots of things to try and improve the air pollution in London and in the UK. It's quite a serious kind of problem, and not many people know about it, all that kind of stuff. Trying to work on solutions. But I think one of the issues is that the people that are most affected by air pollution, it's usually very old, very young, black and minoritized people who are on lower incomes. They're not the people who are trying to make decisions about how these solutions should be made or how the problem should be framed. So I worked on a kind of theme of work called Amplifying Voices. And I think that's something that was kind of created or co-created with Centric at that point. Yeah. And I jumped into the project, 18 months ago. And we were kind of in mid-flow, or they were in mid-flow, kind of working out what to do next. Done a little bit of research, engaged a couple of people in Lambeth. And I was introduced to Sean, and that's how I kind of got into the work. I guess my work with Centric has been really interesting because a lot of that has been on the relationship I've been able to build with Sean, like having good relationship, good conversations, frank conversations about what we're trying to achieve together. Yeah. And it's just gone from there, really. Yeah.
And with the collaboration, let's say partnership on the air pollution side of things, how do you think like that's worked well or not worked well? Like with the partnership, do you think you've been able to engage the community more or less with that partnership?
I mean, we would never be able to do it without organisations like Centric, and I think Centric, especially for me anyway, from what I've seen, is quite unique in a way that Centric's set up where researchers are from the community, and they are able to, they have the trust, you know, they're in the communities, they can resonate with the people that they're interviewing and they're talking to. And us as an organisation, we don't have the capability of doing that. We have smart people who know how to do funding and maybe think about like strategy and linking it up to this, that, and the other. But we wouldn't be able to do that kind of piece of work without Centric. And I think that's worth underlying that importance that organisations like Centric have, because we wouldn't be able to get into the kind of spaces and have the understanding and like empathise in the same way without kind of Centric's skill and expertise, basically. So I think, I guess fundamentally, we wouldn't be able to do it without Centric, without that partnership. In terms of what's gone well and what's not gone well, I think generally it's been like a really interesting like experience, because I think we've just learnt to have to trust each other. So we've done projects around things like, you know, like in the industry that we work in, things are done with reports, things are done through presentations or talks and things like that. Not everyone resonates with that kind of communication, you know. People resonate with things like this, for example. People resonate with things like fashion, communicating through fashion, or communicating through art, communicating through music. And that was a bit of a leap for us as an organisation to actually think, okay, maybe we're going to have to talk in a language that actual people outside are actually talking, as opposed to our language. So that kind of building of trust, I think, has been a really exciting kind of development, and things are growing and we're getting to really good places with that. And I think things that have been difficult or have not gone well, I think there's always like something around managing expectations, really. So if you go, like people like us, if we go in and ask questions and we want to find out things and ask what people think about air pollution, you're inevitably going to engage people on a topic that's important, that might feel more important to them. So what do we do almost ethically to make sure that if we're answering these questions or we're bringing a new problem to people, how do we make sure that people feel equipped to be able to like deal with that problem or do something about it, if they feel like engaged to want to do something about it? So I think sometimes that's been really difficult for us, because the problem is big and we can't do the problem ourselves. And how do we manage that expectation with people right from the outset? Or how do we bring people along on that journey if they want to be brought along on that journey? So that's felt like a tension, but I think we're getting there as well.
And you spoke about like a sort of different language that was spoken like within, like, say, impact on urban health and then the community, for example. So, and you spoke about like the ways sort of you work, and maybe that might not be the way to communicate. So like things such as this, you said, like the creative outputs, like a podcast. Do you think like moving forward, this and other different things maybe would be better ways to communicate with the community?
100%. And when we say language, it's probably like, when I say language, it's in both ways. It's like, it's the language, like speaking English. Well, we speak English at work as well, but it's the way that we communicate and the way that we talk to each other and the way that we relate to each other. I think that's really important. And in these kind of contexts, for example, it's more human. We're just having a conversation, you know. Where in other ways it can feel more corporate. And I think that's the way to connect to people, especially when you're trying to connect with people on topics that might not be familiar or might not be immediately important to people or urgent to people. So I think that's really, really helpful. And I think just like it's worth saying as well, like Lambeth and Southwark have many different languages, like, so in terms of like different diverse communities, and how do we make sure that we're creating that accessibility for people to engage with the work as well. People that might have English as a second language and all those kind of things. I think that's a really practical thing to think about as well. Like things like podcasts, and as I said, things like music and arts and fashion, I think are really interesting things to explore that might feel unfamiliar for like people in impacts on urban health, but it's just like an everyday thing for others.
And you also touched on the project of amplifying voices. So how is that? How are you working well with that? Like, what is it that you're trying to do with that project?
Yeah.
And how are you trying to engage, like, you know, the marginalised communities, the seldom heard communities, and what is that project all about, really?
Yeah, so it's a whole theme of work, really, and at the moment, what we're doing in Impact and Urban Health is amplifying voices around an air pollution topic, but you can amplify voices around any topic that feels important to people.
Yeah.
And it's just amplification of voice in that regard. So, so first of all, to recognise that there are people out there, black and minoritized people from South London who are like shouting about air pollution and its issues. So like people like Rosamund Kissy Deborah, the mother of Ella Kissy Deborah, who passed away in 2013 through air pollution. It was on the death certificate. So people like that are already doing important work, and how can we support those people? People like Choked Up, they're another organisation. Love Sega, they're just individuals who feel very kind of is something that's dear to them, and something that's personal to them. So how do we support people who already exist in this space? And that's usually through funding, through networks and that kind of stuff. But then there are loads and loads of people who are being affected by air pollution but don't actually know about it, or know there's something that might be up but don't know the extent or what to do or where to engage in the topic. So that's been like the tougher part of the work. So we've been trying to learn like how people prioritize air pollution. Do people understand it? How do you engage people around the topic? And then lastly, like once you've heard and you've engaged, what's the points of action? So
what to do about it.
What do we do? Yeah. And that's the point where we are now. Like we've done 2 years of like listening, learning, understanding the context. How do we come together to like actually start making some change?
Yeah. And
that could be in a load of different ways. So that's what we're exploring now. I think that's really exciting because it could be, are we going to do like local campaigns, like doing stuff in like local parks to shout about air pollution and bringing people together around it? Or do we do like quiet advocacy? So as an organisation, we have connections with local councils or other funders, and how do we like make sure that we're representing the voices of people who aren't in the room at that point? Better yet, how do we invite people into those rooms at the right times to be able to like share their experience and their voices and influence decisions as well? And then also things like how do you connect with air pollution is a South London issue, but it's not just a South London issue. It's not a London issue. It's not a UK issue. It's a world issue. So how do you connect with other movements around the world and learn from each other? And then I guess and then also like thinking, okay, how do you actually make change? So is it through policy, actually getting some kind of policy asked on the table in local government or national government at some point that reflects like people like us, basically. Yeah.
And so with that then, what do you do when you come to like a brick wall, like when you don't know what the next steps are? Like how is it that you deal with that sort of situation?
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't got there yet, because I think we're at the start of this journey where there are so many options, and I think we're a bit overwhelmed with like which way do we go, which is why we're trying to do this thing where we try and learn by doing. So we don't know what's going to work. We have no idea what's going to work. We can have like hypotheses of what's going to work. So we'll try that now, see what happens, try and learn from it, and then move again.
So that's like the only way you can see if it will work or not.
I think that's the only way, but I think there's also like wisdom of the crowd. Like we've brought lots of people together. Lots of people have got ideas. Lots of people are pushing on in different ways. So how do you create that space for people to have that conversation and brainstorm together? How do you learn from what's worked well in lots of different contexts? There's loads of advocacy and loads of campaigning that has worked really well in the past, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere. So drawing inspiration from other people as well. Yeah, maybe we'll come back next time when we hit a blocker. But at the moment, it's like we've got the
It's good.
opposite problem of where to actually
Yeah.
to focus on.
Okay. And with impact on urban health and the work you've done so far, what have been like the sort of big successes and like achievements you think where you've like it's really gone well and you've really like maybe been able to engage really well in that certain aspect or just where things have been good like really
Yeah. In this context in particular, in the amplifying voices thing, or just generally.
in general really.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I think there are a few things that that I think have worked really well. Um. The things that I get really excited about is when you see impact being made in the means and not just the outcome. And what I mean by that is we might have a project where the outcome is to change a policy or whatever. That's great. That's all good. But on that journey, how have you supported people to be able to like have agency, equip themselves with skills, and do all those kind of things that will allow them like that ensure that they are in a better place than when the project started, for example. So I love stuff like that, and I think there have been examples of that. I think in the work that we've done, I'll give an example with Centric. I think that some of the work that we did around fashion, and enabling people to like explore creative outlets through that work, and then I guess build their own kind of brand and their own understanding of that kind of where some of that stuff can go. I think another really interesting success that we've seen or that I worked on like almost a couple of years ago now is the COVID emergency fund. So over COVID and in the aftermath of COVID, we funded 36 like black-led organisations in Lambeth and Southwark, black and minoritized-led organisations in Lambeth and Southwark, just giving them unrestricted funding for them to survive through the COVID pandemic. And I think that was really successful because the organisation survived first and foremost, but also staff, portfolio managers like myself, built new connections with people who live and breathe in Lambeth and Southwark, and were able to like build different projects, build relationships, build understanding, to the point where we've got like strategic partners with partnerships with some of these kind of local organisations that I don't think we would have ever done that. Yeah, so I think I find stuff like that really interesting, like the impact that you didn't even intend, but has actually been just as important as the projects itself. Yeah.
And how, for example, that you said that there was like unrestricted like funding. So when it is restricted, for example, what are the things you're looking at? And is there like an agreement, or how does that work?
So with funding, I guess often the way that we often work is we work either with grants, like providing grants, or providing contracts. So I guess a contract is if we're doing a specific piece of work, like a research project, for example, with XYZ outcomes, that would work as a contract. And then grants is how do you support an organisation to, I guess, do the things that they want to do, and with that, that's where the kind of that restricted or unrestricted piece can come. So, say for example, we might end up doing some work at some point where we want to find like 5 fashion entrepreneurs to raise awareness about air pollution through their fashion, and we provided grants for that. You can imagine some of the restrictions or some of the guidance around that was like, one, it probably has to be around air pollution, and it probably has to we have to aim for some kind of impact.
Yeah.
So that's like a restricted side, and then an unrestricted side, I think, is important for, in the context that lots of funders always add some kind of restriction to a project or to a specific outcome, and then organizations don't have the space to be able to like pay for your bills, pay for your back office costs, pay for all those kind of things, like developing your community center, like revamping your community center. So those kind of things around unrestricted gives that flexibility to not have to be tied to a project.
Okay.
And that was really important in COVID, as you can imagine, because things were very unpredictable.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you touched on like the fashion side of things and how we can like spread a message, let's say, through fashion. How do you think, like, moving forward, do you think that would be a big thing about sort of even like air pollution, for example, like spreading awareness on that?
Yeah. Um, I hope so. I don't know. I think it's interesting to see how fashion works, and you can see like the art of protest through fashion over and over again, and you can draw on things around hip hop, for example, is is a protest in a lot of ways, and hip hop revolves around fashion a lot, and you can see things like, I guess in the Black Lives Matter movement, you like everyone knows about the fist on the hoodie, on the black hoodie and stuff like that. So I feel like there are moments that it can click. I think sometimes like from all those moments that click, there are probably loads of things that didn't work. So it's like finding that sometimes it could be just finding that moonshot that actually works and spreads like wildfire. So I think that's where it's like that test and learn. Who knows if it's going to work? We might find it at the right place at the right time. So yeah, I'm hopeful. But yeah, in the same way, I'm hopeful about things and other ways of communicating as well.
And just touching back on like health inequalities, what would be your like ideal solution like in regards to health and inequalities in the community and sort of how we tackle those?
Well, that's a big question, my friend. How to tackle health inequality? I mean, it's
like your ideal solution, like how you'd see it.
I mean, I think a lot of the issues are like very structural. So health. So often we talk about health and wealth. So the it, the stats don't lie. Like the how much you earn and how much wealth you have is very linked to the possibility for you to be able to like affect your own health in a positive way. So I think there's something around, I guess, tackling some of those wealth inequalities as well, and often that is like through class, through situations, through race, and how can we tackle those really deep structural issues? But those issues are really, really hard to tackle. So we're a big organization. We have a fair amount of money, but we don't have enough money to solve poverty. So in the absence of that, like then how do you how do you try and disconnect that link between health and wealth in the best kind of ways? So I look at things like housing, like how secure your housing is, in terms of like how secure you are in your tenancy, what the quality of your housing is, and what that's doing to your health. So I'm really interested in some of those like big structural things and how to change those, which will eventually lead to people's better health. And you can see things like, for example, with housing, you can see how that affects loads of different issues. So from our perspective in air pollution, you can think about air quality indoors with damp and mold, for example. That's a big issue in the UK. Or you can think about like cooking and cleaning products, which also affects people in ways that they don't realise. But then it also affects loads of different things as well. Like in terms of people's mental health, you can imagine in COVID, if you're cooped up in a small flat without a garden, that kind of stuff, it's really difficult. So there are big like societal structural things that feed into loads of like different kind of poor health outcomes. So how can you affect those kind of things? So where it's difficult to tackle poverty in that kind of way, how can you tackle the some of the things that are associated with that to be able to provide better opportunity or better circumstances for people.
And just quick on impact on urban health, like how long has it been running?
So impact on urban health itself is quite new. So the impact on urban health, the name is only 2 years old. The way that we've been doing our work is only around 7 years old. But it's worth saying that the organisation like that sits behind it is Guys and St. Thomas Foundation. It's a 500-year-old organisation. So we've been around for a very long time, and we're now only getting to the point where we're doing a lot of the time the foundation has been tackling things in the hospital, so Guys and St. Thomas Hospital, and now we're actually starting to do stuff that like affects health before people get to the hospital.
Like prevention.
Exactly.
And why do you think like prevention is better than cure?
I mean, I think sometimes there isn't a cure. So how do you prevent, or how do you ensure that people have good quality of life in in their final years of life, for example, or throughout their lives. I think that's a lot better for people's just general quality of life. I think also, if you look at it from a very like pragmatic term or practical term, cost for the NHS. If you're preventing people to fall into bad health, you're preventing costs further down the line for our health service as well. So I think prevention is always better than cure, just for people's quality of life, really. Yeah.
And on a more personal level to you, say we're in, like, for example, 5-10 years from now.
Yeah.
Like, what would you like to have achieved, like yourself, like personally, like through the impact on urban health, or just in regards to like health inequalities or air pollution? What would it be that you'd like to have achieved?
Yeah. I think for me, I feel like what I'd want to achieve is very much linked into the impact, really. So from an air pollution perspective, I think it would be great to see like a tangible change in Lambeth and Southwark as in terms of the inequality in how people experience air pollution. So we find a solution, or we influence a policy that has made a marked change within like the lifetime of the program, and I think that would be amazing. And potentially something that's worked that we can share with others as well. Like, this is what we've done here. Maybe this is something that you can try in Birmingham or in wherever it might be. So that would be great. I also feel like there's something around building power and agency for communities, especially black and minoritized communities. And in Lambeth and Southwark, that black and minoritized communities are often at the sharp end of health inequities. So how can we create the conditions for that to be evened out a little bit as well? So that equity part has a real racial aspect to it as well for me. And I don't know how that's going to be achieved. I think that's a big question, but hopefully we can make a bit of a dent in that as well.
And you touched on like equity there, and like the community having like that equity, and essentially like having a stake in like what we're doing. How important do you think that will be moving forward, and just making the community more aware of like what is going on and how it sort of affects them?
Yeah, I mean, I think agency is really key. I think there's I wouldn't be able to quote it, but I think there are, you can find links between how people feel agency, so they feel like they have like some kind of stake or some kind of control in their circumstances that leads to better health. So I think it's really vital that people feel that they can determine some of the kind of circumstances. I think that's really, really important. I can't remember the other part of your question, but I don't know if I've answered it already.
Yeah, so if I say it in this way, so for example, empowering like the community, like the marginalised communities, how important like is that part? Like empower them actually, for them to have a stake in sort of what we're doing, and for them to actually feel like they've been a part of the journey.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Like, how important is that?
I think it's super important, because people need to be part of the journey. One, I guess, like first, like to stay engaged in that journey, and two, like as I said before, like we need to, when the project, we won't have an air pollution program forever. Actually, our programs are only 10 years, which sounds like a long time, but after 10 years, it's going to close. And what happens at that point? So I feel like it's really important that when people have a stake or can build something in the process of the work that we do, that when we get to the point of like closing down or exiting or trying to find something else or a different issue to work on, those that we might no longer be working with in 10 years time have like something to show for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. That links to like some of the wealth building and some of the agency pieces. So I think that's kind of vital in the work that we do.
And so after that 10 years that you spoke of, is that it then? Can it not continue at all? Or
so us in Impact on Urban Health, we haven't been going for 10 years, so we've never had a program that's hit 10 years yet.
Yeah.
So who knows? But I think the focus is, it's worth like stopping and looking around to see what issues are arising. So the issues that were happening 10 years ago are not the issues that are happening now. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about cost of living. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about COVID.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about air pollution, those kind of things. So what's happening in the next 10 years? I think it's worth thinking about and opening up the space to deal with new issues. Yeah. There's also something about having a time frame allows you to focus on a problem and try and kind of make some time-bound solutions. And whether that's, who knows, whether that's 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, whether the right number is. There's also an argument to say that kind of focus, that like target gives a little bit of a focus as well.
And you mentioned like quite rightly, like 10 years ago, like cost of living wasn't a problem, and COVID, for example. So in the next 10 years, it might be completely different from now. Like, how do you think it's important for institutions such as yourself to be able to be adaptable when new challenges arise?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important because the world is unpredictable, and seems to be getting more so. So how do we ensure that we're responding as quickly as possible? And considering we have the means and the resources and the independence to be able to react quickly, it feels like it's something that we could be doing a lot more. And we have the spaces for it, to be fair. We have an innovation team where it looks at like topics that our programs are not really covering. So we have obviously an air pollution team, we have a children's health and food team, we have very specific problems that we're trying to solve. Yeah. But that doesn't account for things that are like that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we have the spaces for that kind of stuff to emerge. So I feel like those spaces are really important to keep live, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. And just before we finish off, I did write down a question just to finish. So looking ahead, what are the future goals and aspirations for addressing health inequalities and amplifying voices in the context of like air pollution? Like, how do you envision Impact and Urban's health role in that?
Yeah. For me, the thing that feels most important for me is the topic of air pollution is becoming more and more mainstream. When you think about expansion of ULEZ, low traffic neighborhoods, you think about electric vehicles, all those kind of things that are in some kind of way trying to answer the questions or the problem of air pollution. So I feel like there's a lot of momentum, and that's a good thing, to be fair. I think that's a good thing. But for us, what our role is then to ensure that those things are actually that change that's happening more and more rapidly, and that conversation that's happening more and more rapidly, is being framed in the right way to take into account the people that are most affected. And I think our role in that is to ensure that we create good, robust conversation. We have, through our partners, more and more links into communities. And then also we have links within the kind of those systems of power that I talked about, like councils and funders and institutions. So I think we have a role as a convener as well as a funder, to bring people together and have kind of a conversation that leads into, I guess, more thought through, equitable solutions. So yeah, the journey, like the air pollution journey, seems to be gathering pace, but how do we make sure that it's kind of being guided in the right way?
Thank you. It's much appreciated, Farid. Thank you for being here. Thank you for jumping on the podcast. And yeah, Cen-X podcast. Thank you for the guys that have subscribed, the listeners, the viewers. It's much appreciated. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cen-X, real talk
at the heart of your community.